evening, viewers. You're watching Urban Debate with me, Aarti Subramaniam. Now, over the past few days, we have seen many heart-wrenching videos of migrant laborers undertaking a long journey on foot to their home states. As India battles coronavirus, it's the daily wage earners who are the worst hit. The centre and various state governments, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Punjab, all of them have announced a series of measures and financial assistance packages to compensate daily wages. But how do we ensure that the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the economically disadvantaged receive these benefits? How do we ensure that there are no leakages, no fraudulent claims? How do we ensure that daily wagers get their due? Now, to discuss this and more, joining me tonight are Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who's a professor of economics at the Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies, JNU. Professor Arun Kumar, who's a chair professor at the Institute of Social Sciences and a former professor and chairperson of the Center for Economic Studies at JNU, and Dr. Ajay Dual, former Commerce Secretary. Now, Professor Arun Kumar, if I could begin with you. We've seen that the government, the centre, various state governments announcing all these financial packages, assistance. They've enhanced compensation in various schemes as well. Now, all of these schemes are going to be implemented via the DBT route, that is a direct benefit transfer. But that happens via Aadhaar. Aadhaar, of course, is an essential part to implement this DBT method. Now, we've seen a number of cases where there have been certain errors in the DBT via Aadhaar. There have been certain leakages. In fact, government data itself shows, and this was an RTI response I'm quoting here, that says that around 2.87% of all the DBT transactions worth over 2 crores made to 7 schemes of the Ministry of Labour and Employment failed. Now, these are various reasons attached to that. But given that scenario, given this reality and the loopholes that are existing, how do you see this implementation on ground?
So, the first point is that the 1.7 lakh crore package for the poor is not exactly 1.7 lakh crore from the budget or the DBT. I mean, there are other things, for instance, the Mineral Reserve Fund and other things, which are going to be there. And also, the Kisan scheme, where the implementation has not been complete, where the farmers, even though 92% identified, but initially only 50% could be transferred. So there are a lot of problems in this. But I would say that more than, simply giving money, what is necessary is to give supplies of essentials, For instance, now in Delhi, the prices of all essentials have shot up, whether it be vegetables or atta or, the dal, etc. So what is essential is that people should get these things, that's the basic minimum. They should also get, hand sanitizers, soap, and other such things to keep themselves safe. The other problem, of course, is how do you distribute all this? And for that, I suggest that, we have the public, transport system, which is completely shut, so the large number of buses available that can be used to actually supply these things all over the country. Everywhere where there are buses available, they should be used. The army trucks and so on should be used, so that people are assured that they will get these things. Now, as you say, the systems are very leaky and there are always problems of delivery. But if this is the time where we don't show the will, then I think nothing will work, So the will of the state, the will of the people, the will of the administration is very important. Otherwise, I think, simply transferring money will not be enough. And whatever is being offered is only 0.85% of GDP, whereas the economy, is running probably at 20% at this point of time. Only the essential things are doing. So if 80% is not running at this point, that amounts to almost like 14-15 lakh crore of output not taking place every month. And the bulk of that loss will be of the poor people, because they, are the wage earners in those units where they are, losing the work. So I think, much more than 1.7 lakh crore has to be allotted, for all these efforts that are required. And as you say, governance being what it is, I think we need to really pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. Otherwise, we are going to see a disaster of untold proportions as people migrate back to the villages and, they spread the disease there as well.
Absolutely. It's an unprecedented situation. It's a mammoth task. And perhaps this 1.7 lakh crores is just a series in packages and stimulus packages that are, the government is planning. But Dr. Ajay Dua, a fiscal package of this nature where the beneficiaries firstly are so ill defined, there is no registry that these are the people, and we can tick across, these are the people who have benefited from it, these are the people, because there's actually no real data even of the informal sector, the number of daily wagers who are there, the number of them who even have bank accounts perhaps. So in terms of implementation, and it certainly is going to be a mammoth task, what can the government do to ensure that there is no last mile discrepancy and effective implementation of all these financial packages?
Tanvi, let's start by conceding that the government or the entire ecosystem is up against one of the biggest challenges of financing, of health, first health, then financing and management. We have to be able to make use of the existing platforms which are there to reach them out, plug the leakages or the deficiencies to the extent it is possible. But while we can try out on smaller scale new options to reach out to people, to experiment, the time right now is one. We have very little time to handle each of those three things which I mentioned. Talking about the leakages or the DBT, which Professor Arun Kumar, my friend, was just talking about, or the budget provision for, I think, if we look at the provision for the next 5 or 6 weeks, whatever the government could garner from here or there, it's put it on the table. I'm sure if the offtake is much more than the 1.76 crores, lakh crores, the more money would be coming for emergency relief. The government has done the right thing right now by not conceding to the demand of industry and the organized sector of business and trade to give them an economic package which they are seeking. Instead, it's let the RBI say that we are reducing the rates, policy rates in the economy, we are declaring a moratorium on loans and working capital for the next 3 months, those kind of macro things, so that there is stability in the system. But fact is, everybody at every tier of the government, central, state, and much more at the cutting edge level, district, would have to rise to the occasion and handle the emergency which has hit us. Emergency is getting compounded by the fact that we cannot the emergency is one, health. Second, the emergency or the major constraint is it's a lockdown. So not many people can go out. So this makes the situation even more difficult how to handle it. So I would say, please, let's have forbearance right now, try out things, but the public as such and the community, of whether it's a local residence areas, gram panchayats, they would also have to join in, for instance, in reaching the food grains. The television should be showing that in Punjab, where probably the incidence of poverty is not as high as many of the other states, the policemen have been reaching the ration packages to everybody's doorstep, where 6 feet, 7 feet distance is being maintained. The policeman tells these guys, you go and sit down. He just goes there and drops a bag in their hands or in their laps. So this is what I'm saying. This is not the time for us to be complaining. This is a time for us to be finding way outs in handling this unprecedented scale of social and economic financial requirements of the country.
Certainly, Dr. Dua, this is actually a time for all of us to put our heads together and see how we can help these migrants, laborers, how we can help the economically disadvantaged people who are going to be hardest hit by this lockdown and its economic fallout. So certainly I do get your point, but we do need to try and find solutions to help them in whatever way we can. And while one part is, of course, the community rallying together, helping out, as you were saying, giving them food packets, ensuring that they are safe and they're not ostracized, the other part is also, again, the governance model coming together, working as a well-oiled machinery to ensure that they pull up their socks and do the best that they can in this unprecedented situation. Professor Santosh Mehrotra, would you like to come in here on how we can ensure a successful implementation and the transfer of all these schemes? Now, state governments have announced financial schemes. The center has done it. All of this, of course, depends on the Jandan, the Aadhaar, the mobile network system. But how do we ensure that it is effectively transferred to their bank accounts and it actually helps these migrant laborers and the daily wage laborers?
Before I get to that, I think let's put some facts on the table. The latest information is that in the country, about 29 people have died on account of COVID. At the same time, the latest information that is coming in is that 24 migrant workers have also died, of which 6 are children in this whole process. So clearly, there is an issue which all of us, including state governments and the central government, needs to recognize. Let me begin with the following point, that the South African government also announced a lockdown for 21 days, but they gave 4 days notice. In our country, the state governments of India got 4 hours notice before the lockdown was implemented. In 4 hours, it was impossible for any state government to make any arrangements regardless of what package was announced, and that package in any case was announced about 36 hours after the lockdown was announced. So if you look at the package itself, there are rations. Well, if migrants have already moved out, assuming that their ration card is valid in the city, then they've already moved out, so what use is that ration to them? And why are they moving out? Let's just remind ourselves of why they are moving. One, because they believe that there is no work to be had during the lockdown and even after the lockdown, because it will take months before the economy limps back up. So they will, since these are casual wage laborers who don't get work every day, many of them are also the unorganized sector, street vendors, the mochi, the nai, the darzi, many of whom have homes at home and in rural areas. They are all migrating. And when they are migrating, now we have the order that the borders are being sealed. The state borders are being sealed. So now they are accumulating at state borders. If in this situation there is a transmission of disease to others, why should we be surprised? Because what was the whole purpose of the lockdown? That people don't move around, people don't get out of the house. But we've got a situation where hundreds of thousands are actually leaving their home and migrating, and they have now accumulated at the borders. So forget about the schemes. Can we make sure that today the people who are accumulated at the borders are treated properly? But they are being hosed down with bleach. That is also happening. What is now needed is the following, that once they have accumulated at the border, they need to be screened for whether they are positive or not. If they are screened, they could be isolated and kept in the primary health center or the district hospital, where they could be isolated and treated. If once they have been screened and they have filled out forms which tell us what their mobile number is and what their address is, then those forms could be transferred to the district administration, the Zilla Parishad, and those district administration and Zilla Parishad could actually follow them to see whether they have developed symptoms of COVID 2 weeks later or not. In other words, your attempt must be still to isolate those who might be spreading the disease. These are the primary objectives of this whole exercise. They are going home because they believe they can get Manrega work at home. They are going home because the Rabi crop is about to be harvested and they can contribute to that. It could be on their own farm or it could be on the landlord's farm. They are going back to their families and to their loved ones where they can get a square meal even in the absence of some work. So we have to enable all those who we've screened to actually get back home. It's absolutely critical that that happens. And the state administration has to ensure that happens. So I'm afraid talking about schemes at this point is neither here nor there. It is somewhat of a red herring.
I get your point, Professor Santosh Mehrotra. There are issues that are far more pressing as far as the health of these migrant laborers are concerned there has been a mass exodus as we've seen over the past few days. Professor Arun Kumar, would you agree though with Professor Mehrotra there that perhaps the government did not either anticipate this level of crisis or it said, well, we'll deal with it when it comes? Because Professor Mehrotra was saying that there was not enough notice given for this lockdown. But to be fair, a lockdown is not necessarily effective. There could be a case of mass hoarding or panic if there is, that sort of notice given and something like this is...
No, hold on. I'm sorry. I think you misunderstood what I'm saying.
Go ahead, Professor.
What was necessary? No. You have to first understand what I'm trying to say, because this can be misinterpreted very easily. Please try and understand what I'm trying to say. You do not give the ordinary public notice that there will be, we are about to impose a lockdown in 4 days. You give the administration at least 4 days notice so that they are prepared to take cognizance of what is going to happen. They should be able to anticipate what can happen. But if the administration, the state governments of India are not given notice, then they are totally caught unprepared. The people can be given only 4 hours notice, but you don't give administration only, 4 hours notice.
But Professor Santosh Mehrotra, a lot of the states were already in lockdown mode before even the Prime Minister's speech. For instance, Maharashtra, Delhi, all of them were already in a complete lockdown mode.
Not of the same kind. The whole country has now come into a lockdown. The entire state of Maharashtra was nowhere close to the kind of lockdown that you are talking about. No state was in the kind of lockdown that we now are in.
Professor Arun Kumar, would you agree here? Would you say that this has been poorly thought out and perhaps there should have been better planning going into this lockdown?
So one can always say that everything, and especially a move like this, requires better planning. There's absolutely no doubt that a better planning would have helped, in controlling the situation. And I think from the 10th of March itself, it was becoming clear that the disease will spread. The experience of other countries was pointing to that. So I would say that, from around the early part of March, when I first wrote an article pointing to what the impact on the unorganized sector would be, if I could anticipate that, the government certainly could have anticipated that and could have worked out schemes, So not just 4 days, I would have imagined that, the meeting of chief secretaries, which took place a little before the lockdown took place, should have taken some steps. The chief ministers, I think there was a demand by various political parties that chief ministers meeting should be organized so that they could take cognizance of the kind of developing problem that the country faces.
Exactly.
But I'm told, and the press reports are that, the doctors were advising that immediately we have to go for a lockdown. Now, the thing is that, why the lockdown could not take place earlier with full preparation, that would remain something of a problem that we'll all be thinking about for quite some time. So I would agree largely with Santosh that much better preparation was required for implementing something as stringent and as big as it is. And I think our administration has not had the capacity to actually deal with something like this. But I think we need to anticipate the health problem in addition to the food problem and the migration problem, because if it really blows up, as Santosh was saying, people start going out, then we need to start moving on the health front also right away. And I can see some steps are being taken, like for instance, automobile companies are being asked to prepare ventilators, other companies are being asked to do the body things. But the question is, where will we hold such a large number of people? Even now at the border, if there are empty schools, empty buildings, I think they should be used to house the people and food should be provided there. and testing should increase. For that, we need kits. The kits are in short supply. Doctors are in short supply. So to increase our doctors, this thing, we may request the students in the medical colleges to also be part of this team, so that they can do some basic rudimentary checking, etc., for which they are being trained. Doctors which are in non or less essential areas, they could also be drafted into taking care of these people. So we need to move immediately, so that 10 days later we are not caught napping if the disease spreads. Fortunately, if the disease does not spread, we'll be lucky. But if it does spread, I think we need to prepare for it today, for the medical emergency, as Santosh was saying, because apart from the economic thing, it began as a health emergency, and the health emergency could blow up, and that would then destroy the economy and the society in a very big way. So I think we now need to prepare immediately for this health emergency that could take us, overtake us. But if it doesn't, I think I'd be very happy if it doesn't.
Dr. Ajay Dua, would you concur? Would you say that this was perhaps a poorly implemented decision and these schemes right now are a bit of a red herring?
Let me, Madam, just raise one issue, that how does either of my fellow panelists know that the state governments had not been alerted by the central government a couple of days at least in advance? We don't know. We are just guessing. Certainly a rehearsal was done on Sunday when a countrywide lockdown, what was called a Janta curfew, was observed. Fact of the matter is that no amount of rehearsing, etc., could have helped in the current situation, which was probably done on medical advice, global experience, saying you need to take a difficult, hard call, and irrespective of the inconveniences caused, just shut down the country, lock down the country, because not doing it, the alternative is worse. Having said that one, let me also say it's very easy to say that millions of migrant labor is on the streets. Yes, there were quite a few in the first 2 or 3 days, but we should also remember that as per an estimate by the Indian Institute of Population Studies of Mumbai, a well-respected institution, is that 10% of India's population in 2014, when it was less than 1.2 billion, or 120 million persons in India, form the migrant labor, of which I am sure that 2 or 3 million decided to leave, go back for a reason which Professor Mehrotra has given partly. One was Rabi crop has to be harvested in certain areas. Second, people probably, some of them had already gone back for Holi and hadn't come back, because they usually try, if Holi is close to the harvesting, they stay on. But this point, probably the government hadn't looked at the migrant labor issue to the extent it should have. I'm willing to concede that right away. But having said that, what do we do going forward? I think DBT, etc., yes, but you tell me, if you have a bank account, won't you need to go to the bank to draw the money? Again, there will be issues. The bank has constraints that not more than 3 customers can come in, because the crowd itself will become larger. And on the way up, the person would be questioned by the police and other vigilantes on why are you going out. So there are issues with every set of option. All that I want to emphasize on this program is that, look, we'll have to have a mix of options. If we can reach the food, and if we can distribute cash with all the possibilities that some of it will be leaked, there will be a leakage, it is probably an option we may have to exercise in certain shelters. Second, the public places which are there, whether they are stadiums, whether they are the schools available right now, please use them for sheltering people who are otherwise on the street. and do not make a distinction right now between migrant labor, local people. Migrant people, we know if they have collected at a few points, very easy to get them in, lodge them there, and look after them. You have to provide them food, cooked food, as well as some money and the basic sanitation. Otherwise, their congregations in large numbers itself will breed the virus and the epidemic,
Right.
which we are so with such arduous work we are trying to avoid.
Right, Dr. Ajay Dua, it's exactly what you said, isn't it? We're here, whether it was a poorly made decision, whether it was a right decision. This is where we at. This is where we find ourselves at this moment. And as a country, we need to come together and find ways to make this better. Professor Arun Kumar, just taking off from what Dr. Dua was mentioning. Now, we need to find solutions to some of the problems, and there are very practical problems on ground. For instance, you can't actually go to a bank because of the lockdown. As he was saying, more than 3 people can't go to the bank, or there might be certain lumpen elements who will prevent you from doing so. There are high-handed policemen as well who don't really listen. So what are the solutions? And I just want to emphasize here, that's what we're trying to focus on, solutions to ensure that what's done is done. How do we ensure that the poorest of the poor, our daily wage laborers, you know, to make their lives a little better, to ensure that these schemes actually reach them, reach their accounts and benefit them?
So you're absolutely right. We need solutions. And the first thing I would say is, because it's a health emergency, we have to deal with the health issues that are going to come up. Whether it be testing, I think testing should be free for everybody. Otherwise, poor people at 4,500 rupees per test are not going to come forward and get themselves tested. So I think testing should be free, and the number of tests that we can do per day, that has to be quickly ramped up. Medical supplies have to be ramped up, whether it be the body suits, whether it be goggles and various other such things, the production of that has to be ramped up immediately. Then I would say that, as Ajay was saying, we need to use the empty schools and hostels and hotels, prepare for, a much larger isolation that we can do in these things. Then the third thing is, I think rather than money, I think, physical supplies should be provided, because 50 million tons of food grain stocks are there. So I think we can distribute food grain stocks. And for this, a wider public distribution system is needed, which can be provided at the doorstep, at the colony itself, so that people don't have to come out of their houses, and for that, the public transport buses that are available, which are free, they can be used to do that. And I would say also that an expanded procurement system is required, because the Rabi crop will come and the prices of vegetables are collapsing in the markets in the rural areas, because they are not being able to move the vegetables out. So in an expanded public procurement system, we can procure vegetables and fruits and so on now, and then distribute it to the public distribution system in the urban areas to people who are there. Now, all this is going to be very difficult, but as I said earlier, unless we are willing to tackle the very difficult at this point of time, I think whatever we do, there'll be problems, and that'll compound the problems. So we must attempt the very difficult thing of keeping people where they are and providing them the necessities, health and food and clean water, etc., and the place where they are. Those are the bare minimum that we need to do, and then we have to take on from there.
Well, it certainly is going to be a logistical nightmare. It is a mammoth challenge that governments, not just in India, but across the world, are facing currently. Professor Mehrotra, one of the biggest problems also is that the organized sector is not defined. It's not codified in the sense we don't have a number to them. We don't know how many daily wage laborers are actually there, how many of them have bank accounts, how many of them are going to be able to avail of these. So in terms of solutions, given these very practical difficulties that our country has, what are the options in front of us? What are the solutions that you can offer?
Well, first of all, I think we have perfectly good numbers on the number of unorganized sector workers. There are, in the whole country, 465 million workers, including in agriculture, of which 205 million are in agriculture. That means 260 million are in non-agriculture. Now, 80% of these workers, of these 260 million, meaning over 200 million, are unorganized sector workers, of which nearly half would be migrants. That means about 100 million would be migrants from rural to rural, rural to urban. Therefore, we know perfectly well what the total numbers are. Point one. Point two, we are told that every household now has a bank account in our country. This was true already in early 2017. The numbers had risen thanks to Manrega, and then they rose again on account of Jan Dhan. So every household in the country, rural or urban, has bank accounts. The issue was being raised earlier. How do we get the cash out to them? Well, let's first make sure that they get home. The migrants are a human tragedy. They have to be enabled to get home. How? They cannot be all amassed at the state borders. How are we going to enable them to get home? The government has paramilitary forces, and the paramilitary forces has a large number of buses and trucks of its own. The army has buses and trucks of its own. Let's please mobilize them. After screening them, and I said earlier, let us make sure that those who are screened and who are COVID positive are put into primary health centers and in district hospitals. And the rest are sent home and their details are taken. And those, once they are sent home, are actually tracked over the next 10 to 15 days by the district administration and the Gram Panchayat. That's the only way you will be able to ensure that even after they get home, that we have found out who is actually COVID positive and who is not. This is a perfectly reasonable way of doing so. And once they get back home, hopefully there will be Manrega work. There will be other work that is going to be available, because we have to make sure, as was earlier being discussed, that the Rabi crop comes to the primary mandi. And from the primary mandi, it moves to the secondary mandi, from where it actually reaches us. Because if the Rabi crop doesn't reach us, then we are sunk. All of us who are in urban areas, we are sunk along with these migrants who've gone back home. So it's absolutely critical, in fact, that as happens in every peak season in farming, that migrants go back, that they farm their Rabi crop, and mandis are kept open. That means you ensure that at mandis, social distances is being maintained, water is available, soap is available, so that, and you are ensuring this social distancing while the economic activity doesn't collapse. Because let's just remind ourselves that the guidelines for the lockdown say that essential commodities have to continue to move. How are essential commodities going to get to the market if the market itself is shut down? And if the market is shut down, then many of these workers themselves may not have some work. I'm talking about very practical things.
Right. Professor Santosh Mehrotra, I completely appreciate your views and that of the rest of our panelists today. We've tried to focus on solutions for our laborers, to find solutions to ensure that our daily wage laborers, the impact of this, the economic impact of this is softened, that their lives, at least after the hardship that they've faced, to see that we can make their lives a little better after this huge blow on their life now. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. We're going to slip into a short break, but stay tuned. Plenty more on the other side.